Hello, it's Bob Wells here, and welcome to another episode of the Undercurrent Stories podcast, where we dive deep into the hidden depths of the world, one fascinating guest at a time. Today we're in the historic market town of Stamford at the famous George Hotel. Joining me is Rob Waltham. Rob is leader of North Lincolnshire Council, and he's recently been selected as Conservative candidate for the Greater Lincolnshire Mayor, elections of which are taking place on the 1st of May. Hello and welcome to Undercurrent Stories, Rob.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for having me, Bob.
It's great to have you on. Now, you've travelled down quite a way. You're in the sort of deep south of Lincolnshire now, aren't you? And you've come down from north.
Yeah, I have. We've come. There's lots of places we've come on the way. Actually, we went. As I sort of mentioned before, I'm from a 10-generation Lincolnshire family. So I was in Heckington before I came, which was where my dad was born. So that was only no time at all, really. But it took us about 40 minutes to get here, a bit longer. So, but I think the more that I travel around Lincolnshire, the more I become, it connects me with my family, because you don't 10 generations. Well, I think it's probably 11, but I've stuck to 10. Generations of my family were from Lincolnshire, so I feel like I'm connecting with generations of my family that I didn't know where they lived. And it was as when we were in Heckington. There was other, a lady said, actually, it's really nice to see you because there's somebody else down there, and I think they were called Waltham, and so you do sort of connect with, with the place, which is really lovely, and the people, which is, I think Lincolnshire people are quite special, really. We're not boastful. We're very unassuming. We are confident in what we do. We work hard, and I think there's just an awful lot to be said about, being in Lincolnshire and have this amazing landscape that we've got.
I really want to talk about what's happening with the devolution and the mayor thing. But first of all, Rob, can we just hear a little bit about you and your journey into becoming a politician? I'd like, if you don't mind, to sort of go back a little bit and what actually motivated you to get into politics?
Well, I think I grew up. My mum died when I was 6, so I lived on I think it was never really the plan, but my dad worked at the steelworks. He had been quite poorly up in Scunthorpe, and we, as I say, he was born in Heckington, more to the south of the county, and then they moved for work, just as families did in those days. So mum died when I was 6. We ended up, my dad brought my sister and I up in a council estate, which is just how life worked. And his big ambition for life was to live until we were 21, and he lived until I was 32. So that was pretty good for him. And so we were brought up as a very tight family unit. I went to university, I was the first person on our council estate. They still talk about it. You're the one that went to college. And so I did manage to go to university, and that was something that I genuinely had an ambition to do. My sister didn't go to university. She used to love to tease me and say, "I'm working so that you can go to university," and that was something that was quite good. And then sort of from then, I had various sort of jobs as you do in your 20s, and then 20 years ago now, a bit more than that, someone said, I think you'd be good at being on the council. I think you'd be good at that. And I said, well, and there is something about your background that either ends up defining you one way or another, or you then get to use it as an opportunity to connect, to advocate for other people. And I've always thought that in the last 20 years, I wanted to use my voice to help people who don't have a voice, to support them. And sometimes that's easy or hard, depending on the level of advocacy that you need to provide. But it's one of the greatest things that I've been able to do, particularly to advocate for children, because their voice gets dumbed down quite a lot in the world. So being able to support the needs of children, and I've been involved in being in the leadership of a council for the last sort of 17 or so years. So and then I've been leader for 9 or so years, so a long time. But in that time I was cabinet member for children, and we were the first time we were outstanding. So I'm lucky. I've run one of the highest performing councils in the country. Literally when you sit there and say we're the top 3 for children's services, top 7 for adult services, we're not struggling for money. We work really hard at that. So a time when other people are struggling. But yeah, so my journey has been, for certainly the last 30 years in politics was really about championing and supporting people to have a better life. And actually the mayoralty for me is another opportunity to continue to do that. I have to stop being a council leader if I win, which will be incredibly sad because it's a job that I've loved. I was in a meeting the other day and we were talking about how do you make young people's lives better and championing and using that. And that made me feel a bit sad. But then I thought, actually, I get to support young people to have a better life in a different way.
Listening to you there, it's interesting about hearing about your causes, particularly with the children. How do you sort of manage the? I would imagine it's quite easy to sort of get down in the weeds and get right down into the detail of some of this stuff, but you've got to maintain that big picture. How easy is it to go across that dynamic?
Well, feelings are the greatest challenge for most of us, aren't they? Because we all have a genuine emotional attachment to making young people's lives better. We all think actually young people are the future and we want to give them the best chance and start up in life. So it's hard because, I think we're all emotional beings. I'm an emotional being for sure. But I think what I'd say though is that you can't afford to lose sight of the young person in everything that you do because you make bad policy if you do. So actually, yes, you've got to look up, keep your head up in terms of how you deliver the best for everybody. But unless you can keep those connections with that young person or frankly the older person, whichever policy set you're trying to do at the time, you'll not make good policy. And frankly, you're not always necessarily a very good person unless you can think of people first.
I'd like to talk about the background behind the mayoral elections, particularly with the devolution. I think for many of us, it's come along very quickly. We've suddenly heard, there's some mayor elections coming up on the 1st of May. What's the background to it, Rob, and what is the purpose of it?
So 10 years ago, for me, it's been 10 years. So I appreciate for lots of residents who are now starting to hear about this mayoral election, it does feel a bit quick. But for 10 years, we've been negotiating this deal for Lincolnshire. Me and 2 other council leaders, actually, and some of those changed on the journey, apart from Martin Hill was there all the time. We've been negotiating to try and secure this extra money, this resource for Lincolnshire. And I think what's important about this is it's not necessarily about the fact that we're having a mayoral election, which is critical to get the right person. I'd say that anyway, even if I wasn't a candidate in the race. But what's critical about it is we do get an opportunity to get money and resources that, frankly, we wouldn't have had in the past. So the money that is coming our way is not really new money. There's some of it's new. There's some individual projects that are a bit new. But currently this money is spent by civil servants in London with the occasional ministerial sign-off if there's something that needs, somebody asks a difficult question in the House of Commons or something like that. So by and large, this is money that's spent in London, by London, for us in Lincolnshire. And the best example I can give you of that is the skills budget. And the skills budget, when we first negotiated and said, how much money do we have for skills for Lincolnshire? And they didn't know. And then we left it a couple of months and we said, how much money do we get for skills in Lincolnshire? And they said, we still don't know. And so a year later, we found out what we've got. Well, it's not enough. We need more. But actually, it just shows you that actually when it's in the central government mulch, everything becomes a priority. And nothing for Lincolnshire becomes a priority. So that's the advantage of the mayoralty. So yes, it's exciting that we get to have a mayor without a chain. There's no chains. It is just about an executive mayor who will manage these significant resources that are coming our way. But at the same time, we get to take something from London, making policies for us that are not unique or suitable for Lincolnshire, and we get to do something very different with them and apply the Lincolnshire bias. And one of the key things that why I'm really keen on doing this as a job, is I want to make sure there's equity for everybody in every space. Not this, sort of plentiful, of course, we can give you everything, but a real honest investment plan that demonstrates where the money's going, what's it done for your area, and how has it made a difference. And I think that's something that's that level of accountability you never get if you leave it with Whitehall and London to spend.
Hi, it's Bob here, just a quick interlude. Hope you're enjoying this episode, and if you would like to hear more interesting interviews, we have over 120 episodes to date with many fascinating guests talking about a wide variety of topics which include music, history, philosophy, fitness, food and drink, adventure, contemporary culture, and many, many more. I'm sure there's something that you'd really enjoy. So all you need to do is just visit undercurrentstories.com or search Undercurrent Stories in any of the podcast platforms. And now back to the show. Obviously, at the moment, we've got down here South Kesteven Council. You've got the one that you run in North Lincolnshire. Is there going to be rationalisation of these councils?
So that's a slightly different issue. So the mayoralty comes first, May the 1st. The government have said, and so that comes with a pot of money, which is the money that was in Whitehall being spent. It comes to us to spend, which is amazing. 154 million in the first year that we get to spend locally. Is it enough? No, but we can use it to start to tackle a lot of the things that residents are telling me are a priority. The second thing is the government have also said, I think you need to reorganise local government. They're not just doing it to Lincolnshire, they're doing it all over the place. In fact, in some places like Essex and Surrey, they've already suspended the elections and said, organise it now, we're not going to give you an election, but here we do have county council elections at the same time as this election. So no elections up in the north of the county, but we do have them in Lincolnshire. So they want us to have a separate conversation around what does local government look like by locality. And the key drivers to that are always place, and they're also about viability, about that thing that I was talking about, those adult and children's services, those things that are very people generated. Because the big pressure in the sector as it stands is our people. You know, we've got lots of people living longer with more complex conditions. We've got young people who are more displaced from their own homes for all sorts of different reasons. And so they're things that require extra support. And what they're saying is you can do that better at scale, and then you've just got to have a discussion about what that scale looks like. They're saying in Lincolnshire that looks like probably 500,000 as a population, which would probably give us 2 councils rather than the 10, if you think about it, because there are 3 upper tier authorities and 7 lower tiers. So again, the government's premise behind all this is if you've currently got 10 chief execs, 10 finance directors, 10 HR directors, and endless other things, they're saying, well, actually in that space you could just have 2 and the taxpayer would get better value for money. This is their view, it's not my view, but that's the view of that. For me in this space, I think we've got to make sure we still connect people to their council. They still need to be connected with that. I think you can do that at scale. I think there are ways of doing that really well. And I think, we've also got to make sure we've got viable councils, because if they're not viable, then those most vulnerable people, those people with complex needs and disabilities, and those young people will be lost. And that's the thing we can't afford to happen. So I think it can happen, but the debate will be interesting. And that's the bit that, clearly residents need to be connected to.
The current the Labour government's white paper that they brought out last December, the Devolution bill, must have been music to your ears.
Oh, yeah, it was quite exciting. Yeah, we, not least because it named Lincolnshire as one of those places that were going to receive these devolution powers. So it was exciting. I think it was exciting not least because we got an opportunity to deliver something. Very often in politics, you always get a chance to deliver. We'll often talk about things and we get in this strategy and plan place, which I know makes residents roll their eyes, And I tell you the other thing is, one of the reasons why, I think it's probably because I'm really been connected to it for nearly a decade. One of the things that was really important for me is we don't see devolution as an opportunity to tax local people more. And that's why I've made one of the cornerstones of my campaign locally, which is to not raise more taxes from local residents. Devolution means spending the money we've already paid to government and using it here locally and giving us that influence. Now in Cambridgeshire, just over the border, because bearing in mind this county takes us to the Cambridgeshire border, we were only there a couple of weeks ago, and we've been close to it ever since. But on that Cambridgeshire border, where they've just significantly increased that mayoral precept, residents are spending more money. Up in Leeds and Manchester, where they already levy a mayoral tax, and it's assumed that the mayor will know what to do with that better than the residents. That feels to me like actually not what devolution is about. Devolution, again, let's get the money from the government, let's spend it here locally, but let's make residents spend more money, because that, to me, is deeply unfair.
So in terms of the responsibilities that the mayor will have, obviously you would hope it would be you. If we take transport at the moment, and I include with that roads, rail, buses, people automatically think of things like potholes. We're all very conscious of that. If we take it on a macro level almost, if you mentioned there Cambridgeshire, but I'm thinking not so much north-south, I'm thinking more east-west in terms of rail.
Yeah.
How are you going to work with other counties, for example? I think, is there a danger that it could all become very parochial?
Well, I think the first thing is, politics never solved anything, but people do. And I've been a leader of a council that's been a successful council for a long time. So it's pragmatism and being able to work with people. So I think, clearly residents are telling me we need some improvements at the micro level, as you've said. They want potholes improving, they want all those sorts of things, which clearly is something we've got to get better at. Having a bit more money will help us with that, but we've got to make sure that we do that too, because that's the day job, that's the bread and butter. In terms of the bigger connectivity issues, we've got to be able to work with our neighbours to make that work for us really effectively. My conscious anxiety about this is we've got to make these roads safer. If you look throughout Lincolnshire, accident figures are still high enough, and some of that is road design, some of it is poor driving. I can't fix the latter, but I can actually direct support to fix the former. And in doing that, what we can do is we can make the roads safer, and also we can improve connectivity and travel times at the same time, which helps create a more productive economy. It means people get to work safer, they get to get the kids to school safer, and all the other things. So there's a big programme of work to do around that. In terms of that other connectivity around trains and bus networks and all those other sorts of things, one thing, and it applies actually to the earlier point that I made, is that as Greater Lincolnshire, there will be economies of scale. There will be things that we can do better in one space, and negotiations that we could have. For example, so my door's been battered down with lots of people who are coming up with great ideas about how we can improve connectivity using the existing rail lines differently where they're poorly connected, using the bus networks differently, so we can try and create more sustainable travel routes, so we can apply our investments slightly differently, so we can actually fund the passenger rather than the bus. And how many empty buses have you seen driving around sometimes, and you think, why is that bus empty? And because they don't always fit the passenger requirements. So we get an opportunity to tackle some of those things. That's not because the councils haven't done them, but they haven't done them at scale. And that's something that we get to do as part of a Greater Lincolnshire authority. So improving connectivity, tackling some of the issues with the roads, encouraging people to be able to drive on much safer roads, better travel times. All of that can happen if we do it at scale and we use the influence we've got. And things like cycle routes. I'm a big advocate for off-road cycle routes. We've got lots of margins of fields and all sorts of things where we could make great cycle routes. Why do we have to tarmac everything? We don't need to tarmac it. We could create great cycle routes, and we could create safe opportunities for young kids to get to school on the push bike. And that's part of the character of rural Lincolnshire that I want to enrich. In my area, we're just in the process of completing a 13-mile cycle route that connects a load of old villages, and like kids who couldn't get a job on a Saturday before now can off-road, cycle safely. It's a running route for a park run. It's a regular runners and joggers and walkers route. People cycle on it, and all of that sort of stuff then connects communities, and it doesn't need lots of things, but everybody's out taking physical activity. So there's a lot of that we can do as well, but we can do it on a very connected basis throughout Lincolnshire.
That's great to hear, particularly about the cycle routes, for me anyway. One of the issues that we've had in South Lincolnshire, and I know Alicia Kearns, the MP, the Conservative MP for Rutland, has been very instrumental in it, with the A1 and the danger there are the central crossings, which, you've got a road that's basically like a motorway. and then people suddenly cross it. Where are you in further north in Lincolnshire on that?
Well, obviously the A1 is the bit that connects us all. So that's and it's the major bit of road that goes through Lincolnshire. We haven't got a motorway, so we've got the A1. Now the A1 doesn't fall in under this arrangement, but I would be advocating for it too as part of the next iteration of devolution. Alicia Kearns is a wonder. She is amazing, the things that she does, and she's so tenacious. And by God, I think the things that she's championed, nobody else would have got there, and they certainly wouldn't have got there in the space that she's been able to do. So she's absolutely on my Christmas card list because of that. But you're right. I defy anybody, and I've worked in Lincolnshire right throughout the county but I worked for a government office before I went into politics, so I had a proper job in Lincolnshire. I had a proper job. I want to tell you that. And I worked as doing FDI. It was called Foreign Direct Investment for when we had a Nottinghamshire office for regional development. And so one of my jobs there, I did. I mean, that sounds very grandiose, but it's not, because I did tell you also I scratted spuds in a kitchen when I was 16. So it's never. But when I travelled throughout the county, then I was like most of you, and when you had to cut through and had to go across a row of traffic coming towards you, you'd think, oh my God, am I going to make this? And that's not. So actually her raising what she's raised has been phenomenal. And so those cut throughs are not safe, but we need better connectivity to the A1. That needs to work more effectively. I don't understand how they've never. Why? And the tragedy is that human life always seems to need to be lost before this stuff happens, which is tortuous for the people that lose a life. So I think so the A1 is definitely on our list, and I'm already in contact with Alicia on it, and I know that if I'm elected, we'll be a great team, we'll be a great tag team on this, because I know she cares as passionately about road safety and making sure that people get A to B in one piece as I do. So
good to hear. I'd like to talk about education. I did notice when I read the white paper that the education on the mayor responsibility is more sort of 15 to 19-year-olds as opposed to school children. The funds that the schools get in Lincolnshire are one of the lowest in the country per capita. Have you got any thoughts on that at all?
So there is an effort. So again, back to my time in education. So I had children's services as part of my portfolio, and actually Lincolnshire it did better under the coalition. It did better still under a Conservative. Well, not a political point, but genuinely they did. They weren't in the F40 group, which is the lowest 40 funded authorities. East Riding and Worcestershire, they're probably the worst. But education does need definitely more funding. Yeah, the skills. So we're into the skills bracket for the mayoralty, which is actually the sector that I'm being one of those people who's always worked. So I've always done a day's work and then thought, no, I'll teach in the evening. I'll do FE in the evening, and I loved it. And I did it for about 4 years. So absolutely, that skills agenda is critical, because it's not so much that school fails young people between 5 and 16, but not everybody is able to get the best out of school for all sorts of different reasons. And anybody who's been to school knows somebody in their year group who wasn't able to learn at the same level as somebody else whose learning styles was different. But they don't deserve to be written off. They still deserve to have an education for a job. And it's getting in there earlier to make sure that actually we concentrate less on some of the traditional academic subjects, which absolutely should not be dumbed down, because they should absolutely be valued. But it's about creating vocational routes to get everybody into the world of work, and that's what education needs to do. So there's definitely more to do with education funding, and that's certainly 5 to 16. But the skills arena is an opportunity to get people into that functional learning set that is all around how do you get someone a job so they can have a good life for them and their family. And that's something we're not able to do now in the same way, because, as I said, that budget is driven by London's agenda. It's too provider rich, because the providers know what they're doing, but that doesn't mean the personal journey and the big employers are not consulted nearly enough on that agenda. Because for me, employers who know they're going to employ, and why we're not using that to create opportunities for young people to get the skills they need to get that job, which will give them and their family a better life.
And on going back to the budget, the mayoral budgets, How are they actually? What's the mechanism to get the money to you? Is it sort of having to go cap in hand and say, I've got a plan, I need this amount of money, or is it done per capita, or is it just a government decision?
So some of it's dependent on the base budget that comes to the county anyway. So that's one element of it. The second element is clearly there's a permanent reevaluation based on a whole range of different factors, from sparsity to deprivation. You see, to me, I want to use money to show on evidence I'm making a difference. So, but I don't intend to use that as an opportunity for us to get less and less money just because we're doing better with the money that we've got. So that's something that we can certainly put any government on notice. If I'm mayor, they can think they're going to take money from us. Good luck with that, because they're not going to get away with that. The second thing is that there is also still other money that's in government that hasn't been devolved, and there's lots of quite exciting things that we can do with that. Some of that, there's some health money that I think we could be in the prevent space. So, for example, we know what failure looks like on health. It looks like someone, being in the mental breakdown space, that genuine mental health, mental challenges. We know that it looks like physical activity diminishing. We know that it looks like an acute, people presenting at A&E all the time with repeat conditions and all this because there isn't good pain and condition management. So that's the failure end of the health business, that you can just go and sit outside any A&E and you can watch it every day. It's not a good outcome for the people that are presenting there, and it sure as hell isn't a good outcome for the health system either, which is already under pressure. So we need to get upstream of some of those things. That's quite exciting, because we can do some low-level prevention, supporting people to live well rather than be permanently in pain. And, some of that's around social prescribing, working with health practitioners, removing anxieties, helping people to have a better life, access to skills, jobs, smoking cessation, it could be drugs. All of those things could be dealt with higher up in the food chain, and people could have a better life without having to get into that failure space. The other thing is, in terms of funding, we talked about the A1, that's something else that's funded in a different pot. Let's have it in our pot and let's try and do the things that we want to do with it locally. The other things around flooding's an issue in this area. We need to be doing more with that. So that's a definite pitch to government to say, give us it, just let's get on with it, And there is a strong challenge between the Environment Agency and their flooding arm as such, which is everybody wants the environment to be better for future generations. That's good, that's healthy, but frankly, we need, as one of the biggest county with a coastal region, lots of inland waterways, we need our own flood money so we can spend it on priorities that mean that people don't get flooded rather than leaving to get flooded. And then we'll do a strategy afterwards, and guess what? We might come up with a scheme. Why can't we just stop people flooding? It'd be easier. So those sorts of things. And I'm only pitching for an element of it. So some of it's core budget, existing budget, but there's also other things we can negotiate for that we can be really ambitious. And you can tell I'm quite excited about this now, Kai. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, I'm overplaying.
No, I can see you're very enthused. If we had this on video, you'd see that. So we've got Kai just across from us, who does the publicity for Rob, and I can see you taking some video there. So hopefully we'll have some of that. Yeah. Talking about young people again, and I go back to my youth, which is quite a long time ago actually. Youth clubs, things like that, were great fun. And I know you can't do everything as a mayor, and actually a lot of it's to do with the local community themselves, whether it's churches or local social organisations. Have you had any experience in helping young people get together?
Yeah. Well, yes. The answer to that is, in part of my portfolio a decade ago was to look at how we provide activities for young people, and we ended up having a conversation that said young people didn't want youth clubs in the same way. What they want is activity-based stuff. So they wanted more Duke of Edinburgh, they wanted more sporting activity, they wanted to be able to, to chat and chill. Some of them didn't want to connect with that because their parents didn't want them out doing things on, as you say, and some of those things they wanted done in the real micro. So you've got lots of villages around here that probably have something that happens at the village hall. People get to go out, meet with their friends. Some of it, school life takes an awful lot of young people's, and that's changed probably since we were young people. And so we often reflect back on what it was like for us. But young people learn, they can contact each other without leaving their bedroom now. And they get their social connections in a very different way. Is it better? I don't know. I'm not here to judge how somebody makes their life. But, I think about, the way in which my family connect on things, I think, oh, how does that work? But, it's very, very different the way that happens. So I've had lots of experience of this sort of stuff, but it changes every minute. The way in which young people want to connect, the way they want to interact with each other changes every single minute. And it's going to be less of something we're going to influence as part of the combined authority, but it is important that you create those environments, and they're always around place where young people can connect to those opportunities. Up in North Lincolnshire, we invested more money in street sport, which was not just about football, it was about dodgeball and all the other things that you got to do. And we did a lot of that on a micro level. We do some football stuff. We do free swimming. So we do free swimming for our young people in Easter and summer holidays. We do discounted junior gyms. We do, all those sorts of things. We did more D of E. We supported more Duke of Edinburgh, because then you're not only having the social connections and activity, you've also got something for your CV when you get to. So we do a lot of that sort of stuff and encouraging volunteering. And there's endless uniform groups.
And that's all led by the council?
Oh, well, no, actually, we tend to be a bit like, we drive it a little bit, we enable it. One of my last decisions to sign off last week was a junior choir, and we pay the rent for them to do their, so they can keep volunteering, and they have an amazing junior choir from as young as 8 up until 23. Young people are there in a junior choir singing wonderfully all the time. So it's that sort of space. You don't have to be in the, as I say, the world's changed around what you do with that, but you've just got to have an enriched opportunity there. You've got to have opportunities for young people to connect.
So what you're saying is you can help facilitate it?
Well, yeah, that's the enabling space. Yeah. We ain't going to sit there and be able to, to say, of course, we're going to run whatever, but actually, because the way that young people receive it, your chances are you'd end up designing something that they don't want to go to anyway. So there's lots of opportunities to connect in that space, and we're already doing it in lots of different spaces, so we can just build on it.
I'd like to move over to crime. And I think in the same, and policing, and I think in the same way that if you speak to most people, if you talk about roads, it tends to be potholes. With crime, it tends to be, we never see a policeman anywhere.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Because I think policing is going to come under the jurisdiction of the mayor, isn't it? So what are your thoughts on policing?
Well, it does in other areas, but it doesn't in Lincolnshire. So whether that will change, I don't know. But I have a lot of sympathy for this, because I'm a taxpayer too. I'm residents. We all want to. We also know that crime has changed. There's more crime that relates now to fraud that's online stuff. There are more people being cuckooed, they're stealing people's identity. That's more prevalent than crime that hits any other street. So I think there's a great challenge for policing, full stop. We're in 2 police areas. We're in the Humberside police area, and we're in the Lincolnshire. The Lincolnshire police area is so incredibly badly funded. They do, a really good job, but in really difficult circumstances. I'd also say that, there's a lot more drug crime, a lot more users of drugs. You could argue if you didn't have the users, you wouldn't have the crime. But there's another story. I'm sure there's a social argument or an experiment there that fits in the mix. But what I would say is, we've got to accept that crime has changed, the way that it's being carried out. We need more funding for the police, and I think we started to get some of that, because, Boris's time, he had Boris's bobbies, he wanted to put 20,000 bobbies on the beat. In Lincolnshire, we're losing police because of poor funding, and that's really bad. So again, it's not part of my responsibility if I get to become mayor, but by God, I will be a champion and an ally for that, because that's what we have to do. It's the right thing. Economic growth for the region. We've just been hearing about the tariffs. Steel is very much in the news, and I know that in your particular locality, steel is very prevalent. How would you develop economic growth in the whole of Lincolnshire? Well, I think, first of all, what we've got to do is we've got to keep our core sectors. So we've got a lot of heavy engineering. So we've got this, for example, you drive down from here, you get onto the A46, if you're going into Lincoln, you've got Siemens, this vast factory site there at Hycombe, which has transformed the way that it went. In my day, when I worked with them years ago, it used to be gas turbines have now moved into other energy production and using heavy engineering to do that. And those, there's thousands of jobs in that sector here around Lincoln, as there was thousands of jobs in the engineering sector. Got a lot of ports and logistics in and around the area. That's a big thing. We've got steel. we've got which is critical, I'd say, not just to the local area, that bit of Scunthorpe and Lincolnshire, but it's critical for the whole of the country to keep steel making in this country, for very much the same reason that we need to preserve food security and food production. Because if you give away your right to make steel or to grow veg or to produce meat products in this country, you give away your ability to be able to genuinely supply local markets. You also compromise on your ability to buy it at the price that you want to buy it at, and also you compromise your ability to be able to do it at the supply when you need it. And that's just bonkers. So we've got to preserve our right to grow food, crops, to be able to have animal products. We've also got to be able to protect our steel industry. We've also got a big challenge around our coastline, and there's some significant regeneration issues to do there, because the coastline can't just be about tourism. Tourism is a significant product for Lincolnshire. We do still get thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who come to Stamford, we are now, who come for here as a destination, as much as we get people going to our wonderful coastline. And I was there last Saturday, basking in the sun. I think I've got a sunburn. So our coastline is definitely open for business. Food, just let's go back to that food point. 70% of processed fish in this country comes through Grimsby. So again, all of this in this bread basket that exists of our great county. A lot of financial services. There's a lot of financial service stuff happens in the south of the county too. So there's lots of elements of business here that we need to develop. We need to keep strengthening. But I also am really keen to make sure that we encourage entrepreneurship. I want people to be able to connect with the benefit of their own business, and now that they can build that up. That will be a challenge, I know, but we've got to encourage that as well. Encouraging people to connect with self-employment, I think, is critical, because you see, that's how you end up with the next big business, if you can nurture it. And one thing that we've just signed up to in Lincolnshire, because it was part of our devolution space, to get more technology jobs. So if you think of the genuine wealth of experience we've got of having, RAF bases throughout this county. And at Waddington, it's fabulous as you drive past, you look at the red arrows, and that is pretty special. But also there's, thousands of RAF personnel that are in and out of there and at Wittering that actually come to live in Lincolnshire, and they're all trained. So I'd like to see a little mini technology revolution, because these are really great, well-trained people who bounce off. And we've got some great businesses of people that have been in the forces who stayed in Lincolnshire to live, who are running cyberspace companies, they're running tech businesses, all out of Lincolnshire.
Yeah, and they retire relatively early.
Exactly, they do.
What are they going to do?
And their skills are amazing. So let's use that. So I've talked about some of our conventional sectors, which we have to preserve. If we don't preserve them, the UK sinks. But frankly, there's also some really exciting tech stuff out there. We're just dealing with 4 data centres, which are fabulous for data, because there's 400 people working in each of them, earning £50,000 a year. Wonderful, great starting, jobs that you can build a career around. But also there's a byproduct to the heat exchange there, that they can be growing cucumbers, tomatoes and all those other things that are part of their farming that goes with that, which AI can be used to make sure you get heat distribution. So you get sustainability for UK PLC in terms of food production, but you also get good jobs that will sustain us for the next generation. So that's the sort of stuff we can do, and we can create opportunities. And something that really important for me is we create opportunities for young people, because we have a fabulous university. Most of the people that go there come from this county, and they go to Leeds and Manchester and London to get a job.
Rob, where do you stand on green energy? There's been a lot of stuff that's gone on about setting up solar farms in the area. Yeah. Where do you stand on that?
Well, so I quite like solar panels on roofs. They're good on roofs. I think that's a solid policy position. I'd have them on every shed that you drive up and down the A1, you're driving the A46, I'd have them on every single one of those, and I'd be incentivising business to do that. And that's something I'm going to do. That's something that, because we should have a strategic plan for where these solar panels are going. And by strategic plan, I don't mean one that's the thing that you put on the shelf. How do we incentivise genuinely people who've got industrial structures to take solar for not only their own consumption of energy, which releases capacity into grid, but also about making sure that they can then sell into grid once they're not using it anyway. I think particularly in the north of the county, we've got a whole fabulous opportunity for offshore wind, and actually all that cabling comes right down our east coast, and that's creating jobs. So if you stand at Skeg, from when I was a kid at Skegness, you'd look out and you couldn't see anything but just that, the North Sea. Now you can see offshore wind, and people embrace it. They think that's good because it is generating towards our energy mix. Do I think good agricultural land, particularly 1 and 2 grade land, that should be growing crop to sustain our nation, do I think it should be covered over with a steel structure and a load of solar panels that have been shipped in from China? No, I don't. And you'll never convince me. Nobody will ever. In fact, somebody did try to convince me yesterday, and I tried genuinely to have a very open mind for at least 10 seconds, and then I decided I didn't want it, because you'll never convince me that's a good thing, and I know that's what residents think as well. So we've got to be incentivising new builds to have solar on them. We've got to be making sure that all industrial new buildings come with it without condition, but I want an allocation plan that sets out, and this will be an early thing we do if I'm get elected, to stop this folly of the market. And it's the market monster. It's equivalent to the financial crisis for me. It's the equivalent of that, because the market is domineering where solar farms are going, not where supply needs to be and how it fits effectively. What we do at the minute is we say, where's the heat map around where we can chuck into grid? And then we'll work out how that helps us at some point down the line. And in the meantime, residents wait forever and live with that curse over their existence, waiting to know if the countryside that they bought their house next door to and want to live in is going to become an industrial plot, because that's the next succession for it, or is it going to be what we want it to be, which is where we grow our crops.
Rob, what would you say to any listeners who are disaffected or disassociated with politics in particular? They've heard about the mayoral elections. They don't know an awful lot about it. They've listened to this episode. What would you say to them?
Voting still means you can make a difference, is what I'd say. There is still people, even a general election, 40%-ish, I'm aggregating there, of the population don't vote because they think, well, it's going to happen anyway. But actually, I'd say voting still matters. And if you, and this is partially on candidates, honestly, to be able to make a connection between making people think they've got people who would do something that would help shift a better life for them or their family. So I take it really seriously, the responsibility I have as a candidate in election, because I want people to know that I care about this job. I don't just make it up. You've got to have good values if you're going to go into politics. Do we get everything right? Of course we don't. Of course we make mistakes, but you have to own up to those things and say, I'm not saying I'm pitching to the electorate of this area as the finished product. Of course I'm not. I can say wholeheartedly that every day that I speak to people, I learn something new and I use that to try and do a better job. And so if you're sat there thinking, oh, well, I can't change anything, my answer to that is, yes, you can change things. Go out and find the candidate that you think's got the best values. And I'd argue they should be coming to find you too, and that's what I'm trying to do as well. And people message me all the time, so I know that they find me. And I'm really keen to keep doing that so I can keep convincing people that, what we have on offer is not only worth getting out of your chair for, but also that we can make a difference. But we only get to make a difference if we do it together. And that's part of the reason why I want to do the investment plan stuff. So when Mrs. Smith is sat, if I'm lucky enough to be elected in 4 years' time, she can say, that Rob Waltham, he said he was going to do this. And by God, I really think I'm going to go and vote for him again because he did what he said he was going to do. And there is no greater compliment to somebody like me than have somebody say, you did what you said you were going to do, lad, and I want you to keep doing what you're going to do. And that's still the thing that drives me 20 years on. And I want it to continue to be the thing that drives me in 4 years' time, 8 years' time. Because I'm still very young, I think.
Yes, you are.
I'm not that young.
You've actually answered what the next question I've got, which is one of the later questions I've got, which is, it's 4 years' time, the next election. Why are you the candidate for the job? But rather than you tell me why you're the candidate for the job, and tell the listeners why, tell me what Lincolnshire will look like in 4 years' time.
Well, the connectivity will be better and stronger. We'll have the next 2 or 3 devolution deals, which will be actively starting to make a difference because there'll be new money actually being spent on focused things that people will benefit from. There will be greater transparency and connectivity about the way that this money is being spent. You will never, ever think that you will know as much about your area and the money that's invested in it if I'm elected. I promise you that, because I believe that transparency matters. Sometimes you can overfill that space, but my view is you should be giving people that opportunity. There will be more job opportunities for young people, I can promise you that. So I want to be able to prove that the brain drain isn't leaving us. I want to be able to make sure that wherever you live in this county, you'll be able to get connected to things, whether it's bus, train, broadband, mobile, all of those elements of connectivity. You'll see record investment from private sector because by God, we're going to make sure that business comes to this place and we make sure they keep investing in this space, not because we'll sell out to things that we don't want in this county, because we are not going to do that. But if businesses want to come here and they can add value and create jobs for people to live in this county, by God, we're going to shake their hand and make sure that we welcome them. But only if that fits, that we don't surrender our residential amenity. And I think most importantly, we'll have a really clear plan about what's going to happen with our general infrastructure from flooding, from coastline to, genuinely tackling some of the inequalities that come in these roads that we've got in our area, which frankly are seeing them being unsafe and more accidents. We're seeing us waiting longer for the travel times, but most importantly, we will have we won't have delivered all the roads, because we're not going to have done that, and I won't lie to people. But what we will at least have is a very clear understanding about what is going to be delivered and by when and by who and how we're going to make sure we create these great opportunities for young people to stay in our county and for people to have a better life. So that's the sort of stuff we will achieve.
Rob, what are you most proud of? I mean, I could go through a list if you want to, but what are you most proud of your achievements in North Lincolnshire?
Well, it won't come as a great shock to say it's around children. So I'd say the thing that I'm most proud of in my career is that we provided a book scheme that I took a decision on, which was to create a book scheme that delivered a book between 0 and 5 to every child in the county that comes in the post in their name, and they get to read a book. And that sounds a bit weird, because you'd think, oh, well, why don't parents just do that? Well, not every parent's able to do that, first of all. But one thing I liked about it, and that's why we did the investment, I liked about it because it created that opportunity for young people to go to school at 5, whether they come from a less well-off or well-off background, to share the same love of learning and experience and share that book and share the experiences they got with that when they started school, or even before they started school, in that preschool setting. And that has already lifted significantly the reading age of young people going into school. They're actually reading 2 years above where they are at starting school, and better still, and that's boys reading better, because boys don't go into school at the same level. Boys reading better and girls reading even better. So that there's a great equality to that, but in the truest sense of equality, that everybody gets to have the same experience by opportunity of education, which is the greatest gift you can give if you want to tackle inequality. But young people get to have that experience with their family, and it changes the influence of the whole family. It changes your narrative. It encourages people into a world of learning, and that's the thing that I'm most proud of.
One final question, Rob. If we've got any listeners who fancy getting into politics, and when I say politics, I'm really referring to local government politics. Yeah. They want to try and help their local community, and I'm saying any age. What advice would you give them?
Get out there and talk and listen to the people that you're seeking to serve. Only if you listen to people's opinion, and sometimes people have a preconception about what listening to people's opinion looks like, because they'll say, I want this to happen, and then there's a level of expectation you have to try and realise around that. Often people will send me a message and say, and that can make people nervous because they think, I won't be able to fulfil everybody's expectations of me, and all I'll do is end up letting them think badly of me. So have an honest conversation with local people. Most importantly, always do your best and be honest and make sure that you do your best to represent them. And then secondly, never lose sight of why you're seeking election, which is always to make people's lives better.
And in your experience with politicians, if we've got anybody who is maybe, I said a bit earlier on, disaffected or disassociated with politicians in general, what has your experience been with the majority of politicians that you've met? Do they come from the same sort of background as you in terms of wanting to help society, or are there a lot of egos? How do you find it?
Well, that's a tough one. That's probably the toughest.
That's why I asked it.
I know, I like it. By and large, I have to say, most people that I meet, they are genuinely keen to do the best for the people. And the reason why, because it's hard not, if you get into elected office, particularly, at councillor and member of parliament level, if you're trying to not connect with your community, well, that's never going to happen because you're going to get casework. So people will, and you're judged on how effective you were on that case. You're probably more judged now, given social media is in the space that it's in. Periodically I'll get somebody to put on Facebook, such and such didn't do anything for me. And then I'll go back and say, well, this is what I did do. And they go, oh, well, yeah, I didn't mean that. Well, don't say that then, because everyone's an author. Yeah. Everyone's a journalist now, but they're not really journalists. That's the challenge. So I always say, by all means, quote me, but don't misquote me. So I'd say genuinely, I don't think I've ever met anybody who hasn't got elected with the best intentions. Sometimes what happens is that people there's certain elements of the job which become more attractive than others, whether that's speaking in a public environment in the council chamber or in parliament, or whether that's representing certain elements of the community for one thing or another in a good or a bad way, taking a view on it one way or the other. But actually, by and large, I think everybody that puts themselves forward actually does their best in their own way. I'm still passionate about wanting to make a difference. People say, oh, that's horrible. Why would you say passionate? I say, because I am. Every day I seek to make a difference. Do I win every day? No. Some days I get black eyes, and I wouldn't, metaphorically, not literally. But some days I think, oh, what have I done there? But I think every single day I seek to make a difference, and I think that's what happens with most people.
Thanks, Rob. Where can people find out more about you and what you're doing?
So we've got a Facebook page, which is Rob Waltham for Greater Lincolnshire Mayor. We've also got a website, which Kai will tell me what the website's called. Is it called?
robwaltham.uk.
robwaltham.uk. I knew that. I didn't know it. I'd be lying to you. So there's that. You can Google. There's also an email space there. We're out in every community, I promise you. We're literally travelling the length and breadth. So, you can message me on Facebook through Messenger, just as you did, and you do actually get responses to that, because at 2:00 in the morning sometimes I'm still responding. Yeah, well, so I'm trying to, so we try to do that. Sometimes it takes me a bit longer than I can to respond because I'm driving or whatever. But yeah, genuinely, there's lots of methods of being able to contact me. And I've been to flood meetings in Bicker. I've been to, wherever there's something that I can try to do to make a difference, I'll absolutely do that. But yeah, please do reach out. And if I'm not in a community near you soon, and there's something that you think that I should be getting involved with, contact me and I'll come to you and I'll do my best.
Well, it's great to have you on, Rob. It's been really interesting to hear you explain about devolution and the purpose of the mayors. And also it's interesting to learn more about what you intend to do if elected. My guest today has been Rob Waltham. Rob is leader of the North Lincolnshire Council and is standing for Conservative candidate for the Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire. And you can find links to Rob's work and website in the show notes. Thank you for coming on the show, Rob.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.